That's where we started. In the freezing cold, in the snow.
Previously on the Harley-Davidson podcast.
These were not production bikes, they were prototypes.
We'd realized that we'd only ridden them for about an hour and a half in total. And we were sort of sitting there thinking, how long does it take to charge? And how far can we go?
Our very first day out on the road, they encountered rain, slush, mud, snow.
You're sort of out of your comfort zone, and that's the beauty of it. That's why you're doing it. You're out there in places that you wouldn't normally find yourself in.
Welcome to the Harley-Davidson podcast, Long Way Up Edition, a 6-part series where we dive into the epic 13,000-mile trip taken by Ewan McGregor and Charley Boorman that took them from Ushuaia, South America, up to Los Angeles, and all on electric Harley-Davidson live wires. In this episode, Ewan, Charley, the Long Way Up crew, and the Harley-Davidson teams discuss early charging challenges in South America, battling the altitude, the elements, and of course, the various terrains they encountered on their journey. Here's Ewan McGregor and Charley Boorman.
The beauty of Long Way Round and Long Way Down is that we had absolute freedom. We had a route, but it was just a nominal route that we decided before, and then we never really stuck to it. And we could ride along, and if we wanted to, if we're off-road and it had been like difficult riding, at 4 PM, we'd just speak to each other and say, look, let's just stop, I'm exhausted. And we would just ride off the road a couple of miles and put our tents up, get the burners out, make some tea, put some food on. We would just kick back in the middle of nowhere. The dilemma, I suppose, was that we're trying to do an adventure, And my worry, I think, to begin with, was that we would lose that freedom. And the truth is that we did a little bit. We had to be somewhere at night where we could plug that bike in.
We were going to be much more reliant on the goodwill of people as we went up through South America and Central America, and the whole idea of sort of going along and then having to stop at restaurants or businesses or people's houses and say, look, please, can we plug in? And you weren't just sort of plugging into their electricity, but you were sort of plugging into those people as well. So we saw it in a very different way.
It gave us a whole nother side to the adventure that we didn't have before, which is, as Charley said, meeting all different kinds of people in all different kinds of places, and having an excuse to go up and knock on someone's door and say, we're trying to get from Ushuaia to LA on these electric motorcycles, could you help us? We always gave people the money that we owed for the electricity that we used. We were aware that we were traveling through some quite poor areas in different countries, and we didn't want to take that generosity for granted at all. And as a result, the journey was different, but it was just a different kind of adventure.
I think Ewan and I kind of started off. I don't think we quite realised, what a challenge it would be, and how much the environment affects electric.
When we did leave, it was just so cold for that whole first 3-4 weeks. It was really brutally cold on the bikes, and occasionally we wouldn't make it to where we were aiming for, and we would somehow try and do a sort of charge in the mid-afternoon to try and get us there. And we often arrive places, like well into the night, and when it's cold during the day, oh my God, it's cold at night when the sun goes down. So, and those were our challenges. We're riding in the dark, just frozen, and then we have communication in our helmets with each other. And then I found that's when we almost always had our funniest times, was then, because we just start talking nonsense and singing songs and anything just to keep ourselves and each other going.
Having the Harley-Davidson live wire approaches out on this trip made it much more exciting. Well, I'm Russ Malkin, producer, director. To be part of the vanguard of making something new and to have been developing part of a new way of transport, I think made it more historic and more meaningful, and I do think we're up for the challenge, to make stuff easy is not really what we're about. I think that, finding out how to charge it, how to get the most out of it was good for Ewan and Charley. It was made a great TV show, but it's real. They're not just trying to make up problems like a lot of shows do. They just try and dig problems out of nothing.
if I look back, I think at the beginning of the trip, it was the whole idea of every evening trying to find somewhere to plug in. So you just plug into a normal household plug, and find a source. But trying to find a place to stay which had a plug outside that wasn't on the same circuit, so that we didn't blow the fuse, was sometimes very challenging.
Having setups of good, solidly ground outlets, maybe you'd find them. Not always.
I'm Rachel Wildy. I am an engineering manager over EV Special Projects.
EV infrastructure is non-existent in South America. I would say their electrical system as a whole is significantly different than the luxury that we have here in the U.S. I was very impressed with some of the electrical engineers that we brought down who were able to quickly assess the situation.
Charley and Ewan wanted to avoid using our help. They wanted to use as much as they could by all the local areas. I'm Jim Federico, VP of Engineering at Harley-Davidson. And to their surprise and our surprise, they found places to charge almost everywhere.
Ewan and Charley actually plugged in wherever they stopped. So whether it was overnight and they were staying at a little, at somebody's house that had an extra bedroom, they would plug it in right there. You can see at some of the border crossings. Border crossings were an adventure and usually took a number of hours, and they would just plug in there. And so they were getting a little bit of juice at all times.
The fact that we were on electric bikes took people by surprise, yeah. When we were asking to plug them in, people at first they were quite confused because the bikes look, to the eye at first, you wouldn't necessarily think it was any different from another motorbike. But people were impressed by it, I think. They were always, mainly people were just very cool about it and they were very happy to help.
Like one little story is this young guy in a hacienda in Argentina, very much in the south. Ewan and Charley, they couldn't reach the destination as planned, and so we had to stop before, and we found this hotel in the middle of nowhere, nothing. My name is Claudio von Planta. I'm a director of photography, and it was even closed. But then there was a young guy who worked there usually as a waiter or receptionist or something. He was just so welcoming. He opened the whole bloody hotel just for us. He didn't know that we come. It wasn't planned at all. They helped us to find plugs to plug it in. They had a completely self-sufficient system, like often in that part of the world. They produce electricity with little wind turbines mainly because there's a lot of wind. And so they had a battery pack and they had their own electricity and said, no problem, you can plug in. And we knew already it's probably shaky, but we better try. And then, of course, it was just a question of time. Eventually, the fuses went and it was just, it blew up. But that guy, he was just so friendly, no problem, just relax, it's not the end of the world, we can fix it.
It was never about the bike's performance. It was just about the infrastructure and just the lack of charging. And I think people who ride, gasoline or petrol bikes probably feel the same way. David Alexanian, I am one of the directors and producers of Long Way Up. There are so many areas that are, unpopulated. You couldn't find a petrol station or gas station, let alone a place to plug in.
It has definitely been done with gasoline. You can leave the bike and you can bring the gas to it. Little portable can, it's been done. It was actually done on Claudio, the cameraman's bike along this route. He actually brought a little Jiffy can with him and he kept gas with him.
They are the first guys who did this trip on electric bikes. And so it's a really pioneering experience. And the jealousy went both ways. Sometimes when they were stuck and they had to go really slow to have more range, and they saw me kind of whizzing by, they were jealous. But then it was funny. We had like 2 or 3 moments when I forgot to fill up the tank, and they had to bring me, a jerry can with petrol. It was very funny.
There was a point Right at the beginning, Ewan was still trying to figure out how to get as much juice out of his bike as possible. He didn't get as much as Charley. So he actually ran out and captured a little ride along with the Rivian. It wasn't far, thankfully, but that was the first adventure. And I think I now know just how far I can go and what my riding style should be.
We stayed kind of close for those first couple of days just to make sure there were no major issues. After that, we actually backed off and we were almost a full day behind the production crew. We also wanted to make sure that the guys were safe. Knowing that these were prototypes, we hadn't gone through all of the same vibration checks that we would for all of our torques and our fasteners and everything else like that.
Along this whole journey, we were still updating software and making changes because we weren't officially in production yet. My name's Glenn Koval. I am General Manager of Engineering. So we were still validating and making our final tweaks before we released our production vehicle. So they were doing all this down there and we were sending them new updates via Wi-Fi, and they were connecting and then updating bikes at night and with software. And so, yeah, there was a lot of moving parts.
At some point in time, I was like, hey man, like I speak the language. You got to send me down there. I'm Nestor Guzman. I am an electromagnetics compatibility engineer over in the electrical lab at Harley-Davidson. The guys really became dialed in with the vehicles. They both start at 100%, but then you'd notice like, okay, Ewan's is a little less charged than Charley's, or Charley's a little less charged than Ewan's. And then, you know, if whenever we'd catch a glimpse of them, you could obviously tell why. It's like Charley's standing on the freaking bike and he's just ripping it. It's like, yeah, he got his 100% and he's feeling good. You know, the guys are ready to ride. The biggest challenge is charging the battery. Here in America, everything's 120, 60 hertz. You know, now we're going into these, you know, crazy spaces where you have different wall outlets, you have different electrical architectures. You're looking up and you don't see transformers. You see bundles of wire on posts. If you have a 120 volt, 60 hertz regular plug-in socket, that's gonna take a 13 hours to charge. And sometimes these guys want it to go, 200, 250 miles a day. So it's how do we get them there and get them charged up in the fastest way possible? And that's tapping into the level 3 charging system that we feature on the vehicle.
Rivian also was a partner in the series. They provided 2 prototype electric pickup trucks. Actually, the very first 2 of their trucks off their production line to house the rest of the production crew throughout, to take all of the equipment along the journey as well.
Being able to work along those guys and see, their prototype electric pickup truck, what it was capable of doing. The energy within all of us in engineering, we were just like geeked out the whole time. We were very fortunate that Rivian actually invested a ton of resources into creating a path for the guys from South America all the way up.
There was a partner that worked with us, Enel, down in South America. It's one of their biggest electrical providers. And they actually put in a series of level 2 chargers throughout South America. They will stay there. They will continue to be used to allow future people who want to follow in the footsteps of Charley and Ewan to be able to make this journey on an EV bike in the future. So that was pretty cool as well. And those were about the only locations that we knew we had good solid power. Everywhere else, it was a little bit of a crapshoot.
Sometimes we were able to just go, well, we'll just see what happens along the way. Other times we had to go, okay, there's nothing between here and the next 300 miles. So we have to figure out what we're going to do. Find somewhere, a farm that has a generator or something. Or one day we've cropped up next to a solar farm and we just basically asked their security guard, can we come in? And they let us in, they showed us around. We literally plugged into the solar farm. And while we had a tour, our bikes were charged directly from the sun. That was an amazing thing.
There is no light in the Bolivian desert. Amazing blanket of stars, but there is no electrical out there. They run everything off of generators, and a lot of it is still eco-land, eco-friendly, so they don't like to run their generators overnight, which is a definite adventure when you're trying to charge a bike for 8 hours to get a full charge. So I can remember one evening we had a few fast charging boxes that we used. We actually had a little generator in the back of our trailer, and I woke up every hour to check to make sure that Ewan and Charlie's bikes were charging. And then, it's not very often where you get up and it's 5 a.m., maybe 5:30, and you're going out to make sure that the bikes are charging, and nobody's going to see me. I'll go out in my pajamas, and there's Mr. Ewan McGregor looking at his bike, and I'm going, oh, man, I'm out here in my pajamas now.
The guys were charging up in this little remote town, and they had trouble charging. We basically worked with Rivian to try to create a way that their vehicles could charge the Livewire and do vehicle-to-vehicle charging. And I think that was one of my favorite moments in time, because I was talking to the Rivian guys and trying to understand how that interface worked, and we were feeding off each other back and forth. And their engineers made a couple slight adjustments to the hand, and we were able to get it working. And at that point, it was like, holy smokes, like, wow, like we're in the, to be in the field, conduct some guerrilla type of engineering and have some positive results, which was like monumental for the trip, because the trucks actually acted like a level 3 charger, which kept the guys on the road and turned around charge times a lot faster than depending on the local infrastructure.
On the marketing side, we also kind of rode like virtual shotgun with the team that was in the field.
John Beckafee, GM of brand at Harley-Davidson.
We were doing everything from tracking security protocols across borders and countries that they were traveling through. We were processing and assisting with paperwork and visa for members on our teams. We were offering technical support for our employees as well, so as they were working through the myriad of charging networks and outlets and rates and everything, we were doing things on the back end. There were very late nights talking to Rachel about what the bikes were doing and was charging going to work. And, because in the beginning, every one of those early days and those early charges was a first, right? And, bikes weren't in market. We weren't charging in domestic US charging facilities or European facilities. And here we are in these South American countries, high altitude, sea level, all over the place, just doing. The first couple of weeks, everything was a first. And I think it's a really important point, because we learned a lot about Livewire and the technical side and the troubleshooting, through that expedition, rather than in a very controlled environment that engineering would have probably preferred. So certainly with that comes all of the emotion and trepidation and anxiety. It was a really wild time, because we were supporting our coworkers and our peers in the field. And also supporting, obviously, Longway Productions and those two gentlemen as they traversed a continent. So it was no small undertaking, for sure.
Well, Ewan and Charlie are a bit like test pilots, aren't they? Here's the prototype, here's the bike, go and ride it, find out the problems, and we'll solve the problems as we go. Livewire itself is 100% purpose-built motorcycle, and we got the idea it was robust enough as a platform to do what we wanted to do. But I knew also that the charging of it all was going to be our issue. So thank God you had the Livewire and you were able to adapt it, and it was an amazing adventure bike. It was great to work with you, because we had to innovate. It just had to happen, didn't it? And different leads were coming down, and I'd like to think that although people might go, well, you had the support of Harley. It's well, yeah, but this is at the forefront of technology. If we didn't, we couldn't have done it, and we would have gone petrol, and then where would we have been? So I would like to think that we help solve problems for people in the future, because these bikes have gone through Patagonia, Bolivia, Ecuador, the rainforest, the mist, the rain, the mud, the boulders, everything. You can see it. And if that hasn't helped actually, with regard to the sort of, development of that bike, I'd be very surprised, because people know it's done it.
The route that we took up into the Andes and up into Machu Picchu and then down into sort of through to Colombia and through Central America. I mean, it's one of the most beautiful continents I think we've ever ridden in, and I completely fell in love. Every time we go to a country, I'd say, right, this is the country, I love this country, and then go to the next one and go, right, now I love that one, but this one is, and you just kept going.
We've never really had these, the altitude issue. So traveling through the Andes was nutty. Nobody had any idea what that would have meant. I mean, for motorcycling in general, but certainly on electric bikes. So that was a big challenge.
It was just after Machu Picchu, and we were in Peru, and we were kind of heading down. We were about to go we got to about 15,000 feet, and we were going to go all the way down to the coast, which is about a 4-hour ride. We were thinking, I'm not sure if we're going to have enough power to get all the way down there, and because it was quite a long way. Anyway, we started at 15,000 feet, and we got all the way to the bottom, pretty much at sea level. And I think we only used like 8 or 10% power the whole way down. And it was the most awesome ride down. I mean, these lanes, there's no highways or freeways. It's all 2-lane road, and it's all twisty. And you have these big rain gullies in the roads. So you come around the corner and you whoom to these rain gullies. And, and that's when the Harleys were so good as well, is in those little twisty, scratchy country lanes. With that gravel and on that tarmac, all, the surface changes so quickly. And the way these bikes soaked up all the different conditions, and Ewan and I said it was really like, confidence inspiring to ride these bikes because of the way the bikes felt and the way they handled.
The bikes really were able to handle every bit of terrain that got thrown at it. My name is Ryan Kelly. I work at the Product Development Center, and my title is Senior Technical Specialist. We got all the way up to 16,500 feet. And there was no issues with altitude. There was no issues with even charging at that point. What was really cool to see was the bikes would charge overnight. We would get along our trip. We'd start climbing the mountain. And as you're climbing the mountain, you're obviously using battery. And so you slowly start seeing that, that charge go down and down and down. And the guys kind of were, at the first day, they were like, oh man, are we gonna be able to make this? As we were going down the mountain though, you got to use the regen charging. So they would be at about 6 or 7 or 20% at the top of the mountain. And by the time you got to the bottom, you'd be at 80, 90%. Never even having to worry. So then that made charging the next night even easier, so they didn't have to charge as long, so they could just pop it on, pop it off, go off, use their charge at the going up, and gain their charge coming down, which was really exciting to see because that made everybody's life easier.
I think where the bikes were really tested and where both Ewan and I were sat in the middle of the desert having this conversation was when we finally came from Chile into Bolivia, and we were very high. We're at 12,000 feet or something like that, and we're trying to catch our breath, and it was a difficult crossing. Ewan was almost sent back to Chile and he didn't have the right passport or different passports. So anyway, it was all like, oh God, here we go.
We're like, what's that? Can't we go into Bolivia in that border crossing that nobody ever takes? And I'm like, David, there's a reason nobody takes it. I was like, yeah, but I think it would be cool. And we all, next thing you know, we were taking it. And as we were leaving that day, we met a couple of travelers that just come in from Bolivia through that route. And they're like, you guys you're about to have a real adventure. And we're like, yeah, sure. Next thing you know, blew our minds. And that was the best.
I never forget it. I think there was a little like a lake or something you had to go around, and we're thinking, well, how pretty, how beautiful it is. We got on the bike, and it was just like this unbelievable corrugation. Now, Ewan and I have had corrugation all over the world. We've ridden in it, but that corrugation was outrageous. I'd never experienced corrugation like that. And then we finally sort of opened up a bit, and instead of being sort of one track, there must have been 20 different tracks as you go along, because everybody had obviously gone out to find the better bit. And so you would go right out, which was quite nerve-wracking because you had to go over all these deep gravel and sand to get over. And then you finally think, yes, this is going to be smoother here. And then it was just as bad. And then you would look on the other side and you think, no, we should be over there.
Being in that wide open desert, is the Sololi Desert. I mean, I think it gave all of us what we were looking for in terms of the real adventure aspect, if you know what I mean.
And I remember talking to Ewan on the radio and going, these bikes are just incredible. They just soaked up all that suspension. They soaked everything up. It was rough, but it was they really handled it incredibly well. I think it was Ewan and I who kind of lacked, I think we let the bikes down in many ways, as we were struggling along and flopping over and, kept apologizing to the bikes, going, oh, really sorry guys, and you worry about your bike because your bike becomes, that's all of you on it, everything you need to survive and live is on it, and you it's the thing that's going to take you home. And, but I have to say, I mean, those bikes did make it easy, and how grateful we were for the guys who set up all that suspension, because it performed perfectly everywhere we went.
I think that's the biggest reason for doing it, is the not knowing what's around the next corner and not knowing who are the next people you're going to meet.
On the next episode of the Harley-Davidson podcast, Long Way Up Edition.
In any one situation, there are 8 ways to handle it,
The bigger the challenge you throw at them, the more they go for it.
And everyone was telling us, turn back. It was like, what do you mean go back? That's not even an option.
You're just sitting there and you just think, wow. And you're thinking, we rode here.
Catch new episodes of Long Way Up exclusively on Apple TV+.